Welcome to Doom Debates. So I got a Twitter DM from a pseudonymous account, and this is what he wrote. Hey, I'd be willing to go on Doom Debates with you. I briefly embraced doomerism last year to the point I had to start briefly seeing a therapist. I'm probably getting off the train, the Doom train, at a pretty late stop, thinking Pause AI is a futile resistance that will mostly in effect just ban open weights models for dignity points. My P-Doom is around 10%, but I don't live as if I have a death sentence if these laws and treaties don't pan out, which I think is a likely outcome. It's useless to despair about things outside my control, and I see too many pause folks doing exactly that. It's neurotic cult behavior. For my part, I'm a techno-solutionist trying to go back to college for math, CS, and engineering, and I want to see for myself how hard this alignment problem really is at a granular, first principles level, because I really only understand it secondhand like most people. I don't know who to believe. AI Doom presupposes AGI is possible at all, and isn't just a big tech scam bubble like crypto. And then there's tech people, I'd place most EAC people in this category, who don't believe it's that much of an existential threat, but don't really understand the hard technical issues. And then there's the doomers like you and optimists like Quentin Pope who do. I don't know who to believe. So, one of the origins of this podcast was me brawling on Twitter and having arguments on Twitter and wanting to elevate the format to something where we can hash it out and other people can weigh in and we can document a record of all the different positions that people come in with, what I call stops on the Doom train, and then I can help them get back on the Doom train, and eventually we'll all go to Doomtown and realize that our last hope of Doom is pausing AI, right? That's my agenda for this podcast. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with RJ. Hey everybody, welcome to Doom Debates. Today I've got somebody pseudonymous from the internet who I thought had an interesting position. We're going to call him RJ, and
Hiya.
he studies computer science, and we're not going to go too much into his personal background. We're going to
Hmm.
focus on his position, which is that
We're all
he
gonna
thinks,
make it.
yeah, he thinks we're all going to make it. The proposition he's going to argue for is that we're probably on track for aligned AGI, which of course I don't agree with. I think we're doomed. But RJ, kick us off. Give us kind of your opening statement.
I think that we're on track for a decent shot at aligning AGI. I don't think we're 90% doom or even really 50% doom. I acknowledge the risk is there, but on the whole, alignment in AGI is playing out far better than Eliezer or anybody in that whole community could have predicted. We've got this architecture, LLMs, that seem to be aligned by default. The big concern, I guess, is over reinforcement learning models, but let's see if we can kind of chain those together, see if one can inform the other.
Hmm.
We got a foothold to this whole world of human understanding and values that's a whole lot more than what Eliezer was fearing when he was talking about outer alignment and fragility of value, the hidden complexity of wishes.
Hmm. Okay. So basically, you've been following Eliezer Yudkowsky and the Doom arguments for a while, like over a decade.
Uh, Good part of a decade.
Okay. And at first you found them convincing, but slowly you started changing your mind over time, right?
Yeah, when he was writing the sequences, AI was this distant pipe dream almost. It was a theoretical thing.
Hmm. How would you say your P Doom has evolved? Did it start really high and now it's low?
It started rather low. It shot way up last year after, well, it really shot up in 2022 when Eliezer started ringing the doom bells with his so-called dying with dignity post. Then AGI Ruin, a list of lethalities. And I kind of worried a bit, but I didn't really start worrying in full until about 2023 last year when he went on Bankless podcast, just utterly defeated. This is not Harry Potter Evans Varys that I knew. Uh, and at the time, Bing Sydney was playing out, and I really didn't know who to trust on this. It seemed like the entire community was just coalescing around Doom. Eliezer thought we'd end up with a much more controllable kind of model, but it turns out the connectionists won out, and we're all fucked. And
Yeah.
I was kind of traumatized by that. I actually literally started having to see a therapist for a little while because I really felt betrayed. This was my faith. This was filling the religious shaped hole in my heart, and what I thought would be our salvation was our doom. And I was
Yes.
gonna die
Okay.
soon.
You felt like your P doom was super high, like over 50%.
Yep, I started seeing a therapist.
Hmm. But since then, you found some other arguments and it's come down. How low do you think it's come down now?
Just for the sake of argument, maybe it's a little higher, but I'll go with 10%.
Okay, ballpark of 10%. And I'm in the ballpark of 50%. So that's kind of a significant difference, 10 versus 50.
Right.
I mean, 9 to 1 odds is still, you can be pretty optimistic. Like, sure, there's a risk, but most likely we're just going to make it through and we're going
Yeah,
to
and we're gonna
survive.
have immortality and utopia and sugar candy mountain, and it's all gonna be great.
Yeah, and I mean, 9 to 1 odds
Happily
is,
ever
not,
after.
those are decent odds for sure. Yeah. And also, for the record, if I had 9 to 1 odds that we're going to survive super intelligent AI, even I would be very open to the idea of like, okay, screw it. It's so hard to pause, and there's such high upside by getting a good super intelligent AI that let's just plow through. I become very open to the argument when the P Doom is only 10%, maybe 15 or 20%, maybe. But by the
Yeah,
time you
I
get to
agree.
50% P Doom, it's like, oh God. Or even, my P Doom is actually higher than
Well,
50% if we have,
if it's
yeah.
50% P doom and it appears it's a 50% chance of life raft or death, I'd still take that chance, you know?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Okay. So let's get into it. Let's basically compare our mental models and see how, despite reading a lot of the same content, you're now all the way down to 10%, while I'm still more like 50%. Um, what do you think is one of the biggest things you read that changed your mind?
I'd have to say the writings of Quentin Pope and Nora Belrose, the
Hmm.
so-called
Great,
AI optimist, and John David Pressman as well.
great. Okay, yeah, hit me with one of the arguments.
Um, they believe that the so-called counting argument that in the space of all possible minds, reinforcement learning is likely to uh, hit upon an emergent utility function that's something random and probably not aligned with human values.
Okay.
That's one of the arguments. Like we just roll
Yeah,
a
I can
random
summarize that.
gobbledygook.
Yeah, I can summarize that. So they've got a pushback. So let me step back and I'll try to summarize the argument that they see themselves as pushing back on.
Hmm.
So the argument that they think is a pro-doom argument is, as you say, the counting argument of like, if we count up how many different AIs can be bad and then count up how many different AIs can be good, most AIs are bad because the things that we consider good are pretty narrow. Like keeping a bunch of humans alive, there's fewer ways to do that. There's lots of ways to have a bunch of dead humans or just have a barren wasteland. There's lots of different kinds of barren wastelands.
Value is fragile.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that's kind of the counting argument that they're pushing back against. And they're saying, well, it's hard to even define a metric, right? By the time you get into the weeds defining a metric, maybe
Hmm.
suddenly there is no counting argument, right? Is that high level what they're saying?
Yeah, kind of.
Like it's hard to define a metric of like how are we even going to count, right?
I
Like there
prepped
because
for this a
there's
little
like
bit. Let me.
infinitely many of both basically. So how do we even compare
Well,
the to
I
infinity?
would think like most utility functions wouldn't even be coherent. It would be Shakespeare on a typewriter. You get random noise. You know, monkeys typing
Yeah,
Shakespeare on a
exactly, right. So
typewriter.
if we consider the universe of possible AI utility functions that we can land on, yeah, as you say, a lot of them are like gibberish utility functions, and then like occasionally you have one that's good, occasionally you have one that's bad. So basically, it's hard to count. So from my perspective, I don't think I'm going to make that counting argument, right? That's not why I think we're doomed. So I might just sidestep that. Like, okay, I get that they have a counter argument on that. I guess it was a big deal for you. Let me hit you with one of my arguments, and I'll see if you have
Hmm.
a counter argument to something that makes me convinced. Fair?
Go ahead.
Okay. I think for me, a big thing is uncontrollability. So
Hmm.
forget about counting arguments. Do you think that there's some threshold beyond which the AI, there's a lot of AIs that just no longer take orders from humans, right? They're off to the races and they might spawn other AIs, they might listen to other AIs, but they're kind
That
of
is
done
one
listening to
doom
humans.
state. Yes. That's
Yeah.
multipolar. Um, yeah, so a lot of my hopes, I guess, rest on a little more controlled deployment. kind of outcomes. If these companies really think they're making super intelligence,
Hmm.
I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but there should there's some chance we can make one AI that does what we want it to. It's not going to
Hmm.
have this evil inner homunculus that does all these gobbledygook bad things. It'll have a utility function of gobbledygook that it'll just it's like 42 is the answer of life, the universe, and everything. It'll just try to argmax that and end up killing us all in the process.
Okay, so the proposition you're arguing for is we're probably on track for aligned AGI. So help me understand your mainline scenario, right? You just have to pick a scenario that's more likely than any other scenario from your point of view. Is it a scenario where we get AI that's pretty uncontrollable, but at least it's aligned, or it's like not
I
super aligned, but it's controllable? Like, what are you imagining?
I think the former. I think it's a line, but it's not really that controllable. Maybe it's a little more interpretable than we had we had feared. Like Eliezer has this phrase: "Vast, inscrutable matrices of floating point
Hmm.
numbers." Um, we're starting to crack interpretability a little bit, but I don't want to imply we've fully cracked it.
Sure. Okay, so you are willing to concede that it'll be hard to tinker with and control, but in your mind, that'll be fine because it'll already be aligned enough that it's okay if it kind of controls us because it's aligned.
Yeah,
Interesting. Okay, so I mean, right off the bat, it sounds like if that's the future you're imagining, that presents a pretty large risk that we'll get to a very similar future where we have an AI that's also uncontrollable, like the AI you imagine, but we screwed up alignment, right? Because you're kind of imagining a
hmm
future where it's very hard to undo, or like it's impossible to undo, right? It's like you're stuck with whatever initial conditions kicked off this future state of uncontrollable AI.
right. I suppose so. Um, yes, I think more coordination and pausing would be good, but realistically, I don't think we're going to get that kind of pause and unilateral treaty that every
Hmm.
actor will not defect on.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm just trying to operate your mainline scenario, right? I'm trying to enter your world. So it sounds like your
Have you
world.
heard of the? Have you? This is gonna sound silly, but have you heard of uh, the rational fanfic "Friendship is Optimal"?
I've heard of it, yeah.
It's a My Little Pony "Friendship is Magic" fanfic. It's really more of a framing device, where where they launched where has alternate universe Hasbro launches My Little Pony MMO with a super intelligent AI running it. It just happened to be the first super intelligent AI, and it just happens to be aligned enough.
Hmm.
Like it's headed towards takeover and converting the Earth to Computronium, but it'll upload all the humans
Hmm.
and turn them into ponies if they want to.
And is that
That's
representative of your
uncontrollable.
mainline scenario?
Vaguely. I hope we don't get like ponies as the rest of our us what we are for the rest of time. But
Right. I mean,
that
I
that
get
sounds
that.
like an optimistic scenario for me, even though it's
Yeah.
uncontrollable. It's
Hmm.
weakly aligned.
Yeah, yeah. And I get that you may be thinking of multiple scenarios and how they're related, but I think it's a productive exercise to just let you pick one that you think is mainline, right? That you think if you're to do a Monte Carlo simulation of the future, flip a coin and land in somewhere that you think is more probable than any other point, it lands there. And I really just want to drill down on that one. So, instead of talking about My Little Pony, you can just be a little bit more serious and you can talk about like
Okay, let me
Ilya
try.
Sutskever's new company name.
Let me try to divorce the optimal verse from that. Let's say Ilya's new company makes the AGI, or it invents methods to align, which he gives to the company that wins the AI race.
Hmm.
Say OpenAI. He just they take their orders from Ilya's company, and this is what Eliezer seemed to be imagining with his world sysadmin, that
Hmm.
we'd have something aligned. We know it would foom to super intelligence. We'd put our trust in it. Sometimes you just have to have faith, and it would hopefully be core it would hopefully be aligned, but if not, at least corrigible for so we can hash this out at a later date. Once we're
Right.
out of the acute risk period.
Okay, so Ilya Sutskever's company discovers some instructions or some architecture where you can have aligned AI, even past the threshold of permanent uncontrollability. And there's a timing contingency in your mainline scenario, right? So things go right in terms of like
You're
OpenAI
right.
didn't build an unaligned first. They went slowly enough that Ilya was able to hand off this alignment architecture
This
and they used
right.
it.
This is what Eliezer seems to be imagining with the pivotal act. A lot of disingenuous framing around that phrase, but this is really all it is. Make sure you cement and lock in your decisive strategic advantage, so we don't have any kind of multipolar chaos. As long as we have
Mhm.
aligned AGI and hopefully corrigible AGI,
Right.
I think that should be sufficient.
Okay, so again, just going into your scenario, right? This isn't even the part where I'm necessarily arguing. Like, I'm just wrapping my head around your own mainline scenario. So, Ilya gives OpenAI the secret sauce because maybe OpenAI has more scale, has more resources on the capabilities building side or on the capabilities deployment side or whatever it is. And Ilya figures out the secret sauce with his new company. So, yeah, my first observation or objection is like, it sounds like what I was saying before, where I think you would concede that the scenario you're describing is adjacent to a very similar scenario where it doesn't work out, right? For instance,
Yep.
what if Ilya's alignment secret sauce turned out to be wrong, right? And like his test showed that it was right, and then it turned out to be wrong. And you're describing a scenario where we've now passed the point of uncontrollability. So maybe you can flesh out in more detail how the scenario is actually more robust than it sounds on its face.
Um, Let me think about that for a second. I actually agree with you that there's a ton of risk, and it would be best if we could get the pause. But I'm just trying to. I wouldn't hedge all of your hopes for humanity's future on this act of coordination. Coordination is hard. Um, so where you go? Your next kind of hope, I guess, is this kind of scenario of we just happen to get aligned AGI and we kind of lock in past the acute risk period, and we hope we don't end up with a destroyed world.
Hmm.
And I don't know. It's
Sorry. Okay. All right. Um, so yeah, what do you want to talk about? What do you think is like the strong point of your position?
I just wouldn't. I'm trying to think of. I'm kind of doing this terror management in my mind of, okay, well, are we likely to get a pause? No. Well, we could still we could still invent some kind of new alignment technique in the meantime. But and a lot of people say that alignment research risks capabilities. Um, so I guess alignment necessarily has to go hand in hand with capabilities.
Right. It sounds like you don't have like a really well thought out mainline scenario of how things go right, but you've mentioned to me that you've just spent a lot of time on what you said, the psychology management of it, right? Almost like a
Mm-hmm.
poker player being like, playing to your outs, right? Be like, look, this
Yep,
is how I
yep.
want to think.
I don't like the phrase "dying with the." I like playing with your outs. Okay.
Sure, 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 yeah. Which is fine. I mean, so maybe just talk a little bit about that because it sounds like you're almost you're kind of being fallible. You're saying, look, I'm not going to be a perfect rationalist about this. I'm going to be a human, and I'm not going to just accept whatever the
I've
p-doom
I've I've
calculations tell
I've,
me. I
I've
kind of need it
committed
to
the
be low.
cardinal rationalist sin of privileging the hypothesis where we don't all die.
Okay. Um, yeah, so I mean, normally my debates are just object level, so it sounds like you're kind of conceding that you're not going to make a purely rational argument for a high P doom.
You mean a low P Doom?
That's right.
I guess this is kind of what was going over through my head over the past year when everybody was sounding the Doom alarm bells. I just didn't know who to trust. I've joined whole servers of people with like most of them had a 9p Doom. There was this Discord called the Doomsday Cult. It's really more of a shit posting server, but you can flare your username there with what your P Doom is, and most of them were red colored,
Yeah, yeah,
80+% Doom. I felt like
yeah.
I was in a cult, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I hear you. I mean, look, I saw Dr. Roman Yampolsky on Lex Friedman the other day, and I'm a fan of Dr. Yampolsky. I like a lot of his podcasts, but I'm not a fan of saying that P Doom is 99.9999% as he says. And Eliezer Yudkowsky even replied to his tweet being like, "That's too high. Like you can't. It's crazy to put that many nines on Doom." And he makes Doomers look irrational to put
It
that many
sounds
nines
like
on it. I mean,
quantum
that's a lot of nines.
fluctuations would destroy the universe. That
Yeah.
has a higher chance
Well,
of happening.
I mean, he did. Yeah, I think he didn't clarify how many nines he wanted to put on it. He made it sound, as I recall, like he was going to keep going putting nines on it, which, as you say, yeah, quantum fluctuations can randomly cause doom or can randomly cause heaven. I mean, you just can't dump a bunch of nines into a probability like that. So that's a huge strike
How do we
against
even know that our
Dr. Roman
universe is the
Yampolsky.
real one, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, I was pretty appalled to see that many nines because there's not that many leaks in Dr. Yampolsky's game. Like, he usually just says a bunch of stuff that makes sense, and then when it's time to show his hand on his P Doom, it's like this crazy P Doom that's way too high, right? Even I, as a Doomer, it's like, okay, you can't get that many nines. So we both agree, and then it has like not only is it irrational from my perspective, but from your perspective, it was psychologically damaging because you're like, what the hell? Now I'm in this cult where people are putting way too many nines, so it's
Yep.
tactically not a
I
good
thought this
idea,
would be our salvation. It's going to be our doom.
right? You know what's funny is I should get Dr. Yampolsky on Doom debates because it'll be the only Doom debate where I have a much lower P Doom than the guest.
Maybe with Eliezer.
Yeah, I think
He's
even
the
Eliezer
go-to
probably
doom
won't go
guy.
beyond 99.9%.
Yeah, he probably appealed to some kind of multiverse, aliens.
Yeah. Um, okay, great. So I think we might be wrapping up soon. I kind of like
I'm
this because I think, I mean, look, I
I'm
think
nakedly honest.
you're nakedly honest, and you did start off talking about a scenario that some people might be nodding along with. So I'm happy that I'm like, hey, look, this has some problems, and you basically agreed. What you're saying about like, I really want to believe Doom is not super high. I don't want to be in a cult. I think people are going to resonate with that. So I guess my question is just
Hmm.
like, are you comfortable with me essentially winning that little debate we had?
Yeah, yeah, it's fine. I don't take it
Okay.
seriously. I'm
Okay.
trying to
Okay.
learn more, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I've seen much things that are over my head from optimists who have about the same P Doom as me, but are much better informed on the topic and have much more of an actionable plan.
Right. That makes sense. So I think we can probably agree that on the object level, are not as good as defending the position as some of these other guys, like Quentin Pope and Nora Belrose.
Yep,
So what I'd like to do is get one of them on Doom debates. And I actually have had a debate with Quentin in the past. I think he held
I've
up his
seen it.
position well. I can't say that I was convinced, but I do think that some of the people in the audience would say that he won, and I get why they would say that. Like, I think he argued well, and I think that I can operate his position. Like, I think I can turn the tables and pretend like I have his position, and I could
The
probably
intellectual
win.
Turing test.
Exactly right. Yeah, I think it's technically the ideological Turing test, but I always say intellectual Turing test, right?
Yep.
Um, yeah, and that would be a fun exercise, right, for me to come in as the Quinton position. But despite being able to operate, I think I still find it unconvincing. But anyway, I think we should do a rematch with Quinton and or Nora, maybe a tag
Yeah.
team.
Well, maybe when I have more education into the subject. I'm trying to go back to college right now,
Nice.
but I admittedly my understanding of a lot of things is very superficial. Like I can't really delve into the math
Hmm.
of Goodhart's law and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people accuse doomers of just being psychological doomers. Like, I just love to
Yep.
say that the world is burning, and that keeps me locked into this doom position because my personality is a doomer personality of the
Mine is
past.
very not much not a doomer personality. I'm an optimist.
You're an optimist, but also there's like some flinching too, right? So you're not only do you like to be an optimist, but you also hate to be a pessimist. So you're kind of locked into this optimistic position.
When I really engaged with the doom positions the other day, like my head was feeling physically uncomfortable. Like,
Hmm.
holy shit, I need to go touch some grass.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's how hard it can be.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you coming on Doom Debates because you've been very candid with your own feelings, right? You've been very introspective, you've been very self-aware. So I thank you for this. This is what high quality discourse looks like, right? We're not trying to do
Yep.
rhetoric for the audience, we're just telling it like it is.
Yep.
Cool, man. All right, RJ, I'll give you the last word. Any other points you want to make?
I think we're all gonna make it somehow.
Thank you very much, and thank you, audience, for watching this episode of Doom Debates.